Hey guys, so we get a lot of questions about what's my seeding rate per acre? How should I adjust it if I'm broadcasting, if I'm tilling, or if I'm using a no-till drill? Well, if you're interested in learning how we use that and adjust our metrics, stay tuned for this next video.
But you mentioned something there I wanted to ask about seeding rates and how that, may work with your farm versus my farm versus, Brad out in Iowa's farm. What are people doing, or what have you heard that people are doing different seeding rates? People have different types of equipment. There's really not one way to skin this cat.
It always goes back to what are the growers' goals? If somebody says, okay, I want to do tillage, I'm in a high deer density, but I'm going to do tillage and broadcast. You're probably going to get away with 45 pounds. You might bump up a little bit depending on, do you use a packer? Do you have perfect seed bed? What's the deer density like? What's the neighborhood like? And that might vary from season to season. I mean, that might vary from summertime. You might have a lot of young soybeans around your farm because you're in a big ag area where your summer food plot is not going to get a ton of browse, right? And then all of a sudden your fall food plots get hammered because all the ag's taken off. So you might have to adjust your rates. You might know, hey, in the fall, I got to go a little bit heavier. And in the spring, I can pretty much stay at that 45 pounds to the acre. So that's number one. Number two is planting method. If you're like, hey, I want to do an herbicide burn down and I want to seed into that thatch, well, then what, we have to ask the question again, what's the deer density like? How many acres are you planting relative to your neighborhood? Also, what's your thatch like, right? I mean, do you have a heavy thatch? Do you have a thin thatch? Is it following the carbon load thatch? That's one of the things why we've developed this system is that you do have a good thatch, but it's not too thick, right? I mean, that's kind of the whole point of the system. So you can go into the nitro boost can go into that carbon load and you just kind of keep building and stacking on top of those year after year, season after season.
Spring, fall. Yep.
But if you don't have that, or you're just starting, or you tried something different and you want to come back to this, those are all things that you might have to adjust based on, your given situation, your soil fertility, et cetera. We have some guys that are using a no-till drill, just to give you an example of the extreme of this, that are drilling some of the seed rates 60 to 70 pounds to the acre. I would say that's on the high end, right? We have other guys who are no-till drilling at like 45 to 50, depending how tight they get on their calibration, right? There's some variability there and stuff. And a lot of that, again, has to go back to what is your deer density like? We have guys who say, well, I drilled 60 pounds to the acre, but I'm seeing 28 deer a night in that particular field. You're probably going to have a lot of groceries in order to keep up with that level of browse. You have other guys don't see 28 deer all season. It just, those are things to keep in mind. And that's also why, we want to spend people's money like it's our own, right? I mean, that's why we try to make the very best mixes we possibly can, the best quality. And I don't want to sit there and say, you know what, double your seed rate if you're broadcasting. I just don't feel that's a good recommendation for across the board. I'd rather have somebody go, I felt it was a little bit light. Next year, I'm going to bump up by a half acre, than feel like they just had to buy extra seed and then they just threw it out just because that was a recommendation. So it's really case by case. And, your method of planting, how you're planting, your deer density, your soil fertility. And as you work through the system, you're going to be able to fine tune that. I can tell you that for me, there have been years where it seems on the farm, there's more deer than we know what to do with. And I'm like, I know I'm going to have to increase my seeding rate. I'm going to try to plant a little bit more food in some fields that haven't been planted, et cetera. There's other years, over the last almost 15 years, 12 years, whatever it's been, you see these natural, variability in deer densities, right? And changes in the neighborhood. And there's been some years where I'm like, man, it just doesn't seem like we have as many deer around. And I've been real happy with keeping it, right at kind of the standard rate. So I think that's kind of what people can do as they make these decisions on their own farm. And we're happy to help too. You can always email, text us, call us, and we're happy to kind of have that discussion. We can kind of go through the checklist.
One thing you mentioned there, like just doubling your rate because, well, maybe if it was really cheap or a lot of grains or something, it's easier to do that, right? Like throw another 50 pounds of rye on there. That's easier to do than the high quality mix that we're talking about. Like for my broadcasting, if I'm doing broadcast type method, I'll do, 25 to 50% more in addition to the 45 pounds per acre. That's my sweet spot that I like. Not doubling the bag because the mixes are designed and percentage wise put in there a certain way to do it at the seeding rate. So it's not just as simple as I'm going to double it and hope everything goes well. We've put a lot more thought and process into this.
Right. And I'd rather have somebody stagger their planting if possible than just double the planting and just throw a bunch of seed out there and not have a good plan as far as if they want to use tillage, or if they're just doing broadcast, or having a good plan as far as how to get these plants established. Like, I would rather work through with an individual grower or food plotter on a plan that makes sense for their farm and their location than just say, just double or triple the seed rate and let's see what sticks, right? Like, I personally don't think that's a really good plan. And even when you do that, you still have to question, well, how much of that double or tripled rate actually came up? Because maybe you only needed 10%, right? It's the same thing with fertilizer. People say, more fertilizer is not necessarily better, because you might only get a small percentage of the rate in which you put down. And that's why it makes a lot of sense to take the time to learn about your specific location and come up with a plan. Just like after taking soil tests, we do that. It's the same idea with a planting plan. Whether you're doing this, or it doesn't really matter with anything, whether you're planting a garden, you got to kind of start with that soil test and then come up with that plan based on your given situation, and you'll be a lot more successful that way.
And like you mentioned, we're happy to help. So you guys want to reach out? We've talked to plenty of people this spring already. Those who want to reach out, hey, I have this idea, I want to do it this way. What do you think? That's what we're here for.